Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, we're back, you and me.
Just alone again. Last time we were together, we talked a little bit about the higher education system and kind of how that's evolved and how different generations look at it. It seems something related to that, but potentially having even more of an impact, is how the different generations look at the economic system. Mm-hmm. I clearly grew up in one that focused on the capitalist system and that. I hear a lot of the younger generation now talking in very flowery terms, envious of more socialist type of economic structures.
I think the younger generation has been lulled to sleep actually by the productivity of the older generation in a lot of ways. The baby boomers built the nation. They built the middle class coming out of World War II. If I look at the Great Society programs coming out of LBJ in the 60s, and then ultimately how the nation really transformed itself through heightened industrialization and ultimately innovation and technology, the baby boomers and the older generations, maybe one or two, really built America's economic force and engine coming out of World War II. And this younger generation, I think, has just no appreciation for that. In the education discussion that we had previously, we talked about how they, kind of sit in this echo chamber of their own beliefs and desires and wants and need to feel heard, but they lack the depth of understanding about the hows and the whys and the whos that got them there.
Okay, but the capitalist system that we have, and I don't think you can argue these facts, has clearly created more wealth than any other type of economic system. It has reduced poverty and pulled more people out of poverty than any economic system that sits out there. But where we stand today seems to me to be an interesting paradox, because we have young people who are advocating to go to the socialist system. At the same time, we have the first generation in our nation's history that is saying, I won't do as well as my parents did.
Right. What's also it's all interesting to me because the lack of knowledge basis on how the economy works, like basic things like a dollar in and a dollar out, just really simple stuff, the cost of food, the cost of energy, these things all play a role into how someone gets educated and ultimately forms economic opinions. But in a lot of ways, the younger generation, they take their facts off of a TikTok video about, the cost of eggs or something else miscellaneous, without really understanding, like, how did those eggs actually get there and what were the driving factors globally that transformed those cost dynamics. I think one of the things that's also a little bit sad in a lot of ways is middle-class wage growth has plateaued. And so...
in real sense, it's been flat for 40 years.
Exactly. And so it really hasn't moved. So I think there's part of this generation that's also growing up saying, hey, I haven't seen the movement that I thought I would see. And maybe their parents haven't seen that movement. So some of that, not call it disdain or mistrust, but some of that just unfortunate non-growth has led them to believe and not trust the system. Whereas you have this whole other segment of the society where, if I look back the last 15 years since the GFC, if you had a decent amount of assets, you've just been up and to the right. You've gone up with the stock market. The stock market has obviously boomed, and you've made money hand over fist. And then there's all these new ways to make money in this economy, which I think is so fascinating for this younger generation. We're moving away from just the nuts and bolts of call it a production economy, with mills and steel and things like that. And we've moved obviously into technology, but now we've moved into this creator economy, the digitization of the creator mindset and how that person works and lives is so different today. And it's really an economic force that I don't think we really necessarily understand yet, but it's one the younger generation is tapping into, is like, hey, this is my potential pathway to going and making significant wealth.
And the way I look at it too, Kyle, and I think it's a real problem because young people today don't understand it, as you said, and they've gone in it. That may be a fault of either the education system or my generation in terms of educating them that.
Right.
When we had Rob Kaplan on not too long ago, we got in the conversation that over the last 10 plus years it's really closer to 20 years, of having a zero rate environment, that is a great system for anybody that has assets, e.g. the top 10%, 1%, 10th of 1%, whatever you want to do. For most of middle America, that kind of, 25th percentile, 75th percentile, who are dependent on wages, a zero rate environment means you're going to have probably flat wages. I think the other thing that's happened too, at least that I sense from young people, and you touched on a little bit, is in today's world, there's not very much trust in the capital system and especially in companies. Used to be that you had some job security. Now there's no job security. I think everybody understands it. And that I think then has compounded it with young people then looking at jobs and saying, if they don't have any responsibility to me, I don't have any responsibility to them either.
Got it. And it's jumping up the ladder. I mean, the young people, the people are not staying at jobs as long as they used to. They're not going to be lifers at a Deloitte or a KPMG like you might have had in the years ago, frankly. They're going to go jump and say, hey, I can get $5,000 more here on a new job opening, than I did 18 months ago, or maybe it's $10,000 more. They're just playing this game of hopscotch that I don't think enables them to go be present where they are fully, to go learn how to do a job. I mean, I remember my first job. My first job was at my mom's office in the outside storage unit, doing medical charts and organizing them in the summer. And it was rather warm. And, it was one of those things. It wasn't sexy. It's not glamorous. It wasn't highly paid. But it was a job because it was a job that helped her office move more efficiently. And I got taught very young that if I did this well, their business would move more efficiently and they would have greater success and move, mobilizing patients to their practice, et cetera. And so I had the onus on me by myself working in the storage unit to go say, hey, I'm going to go do this with excellence. And I think the younger generation lacks the ability to see that opportunity to go in and learn and be present and then ultimately execute with excellence that I think can push a company forward.
I didn't realize that we were both in the healthcare industry because I will actually take your job. My job was to be a janitor in a medical office building after hours. So I would go in at 9 at night and work for the next 3 hours or so when I was going through school and clean up messes that OSHA wouldn't allow you to do today. With that said, though, I wonder, too, if the structure of the economy, aside from the particular system, hasn't done it. Harvard Business School today will tell you that somebody coming out of school today will have 6 different careers. Not 6 jobs, 6 different careers. That rate of change is amazing when you stop and think about it.
Yeah, it is. It means that you're having to be pretty quick on the fly to learn all sorts of different things. You're having to context switch. You're going to have to move out of different industries and into newer industries, et cetera. And I think, again, it speaks to what we talked about earlier. If you're not set and stable in one position, I think like the older generation modeled, that younger generation is just always chomping at the bit for what's new and what's next. And yes,
especially if education systems aren't teaching you how to learn and solve problems, which we talked about in our previous session.
In our previous episode, obviously, we touched on the fact that if you're not learning the depth of these skills, then you're not going to know how to transfer these skills ultimately into the workforce. And let's take a real-world example right now. You're at the date of filming this, we're a couple months out from the mayoral race in New York City.
Yeah, which increasingly looks like it's decided.
Yeah, it's going to be likely Zohran Mamdani, who's a devout socialist. I mean, he is absolutely bought in, and he's talking about bringing back government-run grocery stores. He wants to do all sorts of price fixing on apartment buildings. Like, there's a lot of the socialist economic playbook that I feel like he's throwing out, and people are signing up for it hand over foot, because in a lot of ways, I don't think they know what the consequences are, because I don't think they know the history of those consequences and how that's played out in other areas.
Yeah, and I'm amazed at that, and it's almost laughable. Now, it is not a humorous situation, and the New Yorkers may find that quickly. But it's humorous when you say, okay, can you give me an example of a socialist economy that worked or even came close to working? Right. So you talk about the grocery stores, the whole idea, and I was in government, of a government running a grocery store, which, by the way, is one of the lowest margin businesses you can imagine.
Exactly.
And trying to make this thing work. It is bizarre. It is just bizarre to me.
But he's the guy. And
he's clearly got a lot of New Yorkers marching beside him.
And for sure, there's going to be a time period if he's elected, and we'll see what happens. But if he's elected, he's got to get into the role. He's got to sit at the desk. He's got to actually make the decisions. And so campaign promises and things that are said on the trail are a little bit different than actual governing. Get that. But let's say he goes and executes on 50 to 60% of what he's talking about. Well, 60% is 60% more than anybody else has done in that city in a long time. And I think it's setting up the New York economy to have a real problem with corporations that are there. Obviously, they're a financial mecca in this country and also the world. But I also think it's a bad representation to the younger generation of ultimately how to go lead economically. It's not pro-business. It's not inviting companies in and corporations in to go grow jobs and strike innovation and really spark the economy to run towards growth. It's hey, we're going to put the clamps on here and we're going to put you in a box over here and we're going to go say, hey, the government's going to control this over here. And that really, I think that's a big concern of mine as the younger generation just kind of latches onto the campaign because he's got great TikTok videos or whatever he's got, but they don't have the understanding of what the actual consequences are of the policy. And I think that's indicative of America today where talking heads, talking points may sound great, may look good, but the actual latching on to the real nuts and bolts, the ABCs of policy, is something that this country's lost.
I think you're right. I think those are good points. I often get the question, speaking that I do, kind of describe your view of leadership. And I talk about vision, which everybody does, and the importance of identifying and articulating that direction, then motivating groups behind you. But I think there's one thing that's kind of got left behind, which I actually think is the first rule of leadership, and that's define reality. I think in today's world, a lot of times, and I think you're describing it, I think to an extent, there's a generational difference.
For sure.
Your generation, or a younger even generation than yours is guilty of this, is I'm going to define reality as either A, the way I want it to be, or A, the way I think it should be. So want or should. And I think this is part of what it is. I think people are frustrated enough, and the frustration level is high enough, that they are going to define reality as what they want it to be. Not because there's any fact basis behind it, there's any analysis, or there's any reason in history to believe that it will work, but it is reaching out and hoping for something. And I think you've got a lot of young people in New York that are in that position and may have good jobs, but the cost of housing has gotten out of line, cost of food has gotten out of line, et cetera, and they're groping for any type of answer.
Yeah, and I think they're just looking for what's a potential quick fix. And, I hate to break the news to all of those people, but the government generally, when they get their hands on it, is not a quick fix. Actually, generally elongates fixing the problem. And I think what is sad, and as I've seen, just my generation, obviously some people younger than me, I think they're puzzled by why the economy kind of hasn't worked. And, there's obviously, as we talked about with Rob Kaplan a couple months back, like this zero rate environment coupled with massive amounts of spending is just a recipe for economic, ultimately disparity, unless you're in this kind of really high earning top 1% to 5% category. And so there's a lot of people that haven't seen it work. But I think what is true is we go back to your earlier point you started off the episode with, which is capitalism has led to more growth, higher wages, more expansion, greater innovation than any other economic system in the world. And that's something that we need to get back to teaching the nuts and the bolts basics of to the younger generation so that they can carry the torch and make sure America is, ready and stable moving forward.
And capitalism isn't just kind of profit making. I think the pieces that go with it are critical. It is a way to allocate capital. There's never enough capital. There's never enough people.
Sure.
But how that allocates that to the benefit of society, a socialist society, you can say the government makes those decisions. I was in the Soviet Union in the middle 80s. I can guarantee you it didn't work. You've got that situation. You also have another piece of it, which I think could actually be the most dangerous part of all of it. And that's the innovation and the creativity.
Correct.
If there's not the incentive to kind of come up with that idea, and you're a great example of it.
Go risk it. Yep.
Came up with an idea, you risked a lot of your resources, you risked a lot of your time to kind of say, hey, I've got an idea and I'm going to make that.
Right.
A government wouldn't have done that.
No.
It would have been you because you thought there was, and knowing you well enough that there was the satisfaction of coming up with an idea and making it happen, but there was also a financial incentive
For
there
sure. Yeah.
to do it. And when we talk about capitalism, I'm not sure that we give enough credence to the importance of innovation, what that provides for us.
Correct.
And this whole idea of how we allocate resources.
I think you're spot on. I think the education system, in our previous episode, obviously we discussed how I think innovation has begun to be demonized in a lot of ways. Like, this company did this, but I don't like how they did it. And that the younger generation views them as, it's a negative. Well, not really. I mean, economic fiscal policy, making money as a business is just business. It's not a social or a personal situation. It's is a dollar in, $2 out? Is a dollar in, $1.50 out? Like the very basics of how the economy works, you've got to understand that you're taking risk. You're risking your time. You're risking your energy, your resources. You could be doing other things. There's opportunity cost everywhere. And I just don't think the younger generation really has an appreciation for how those things all work together.
And I think the other piece that's missed in this whole conversation, and it's amazing because for the progressive or the far left, it seems to me that this is the one that ought to come home.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the government running everything, your individual freedom has to go down. There has to be a sharing. Now, I think in part there's a trade-off that young people want to make. They'll accept equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity.
Yeah, spot on. I think what also is a little bit amusing, just to close the book on this innovation conversation, if I look at the creator economy, so the digital creators, the podcasts, the one-off videos, the TikToks, et cetera, someone built those platforms.
Oh, absolutely.
Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter. If I think of even Dallas locally, Ambervins and Box and Baxter Box who built LTK, Like to Know It, which was formerly Reward Style. These platforms have changed the lives of so many. And the younger generation is so quick to run there, but they lack the almost self-awareness
Exactly.
of how the innovation that they are profiting off of.
And what happens when you change that structure
You got it.
from the next idea. And I'm thinking not only those sorts of things, but medical innovation.
Absolutely.
Those sorts of things that give us a better life and a chance at a much longer life too. I was struck by something Fred said in one of our previous sessions, because he said when he was talking and dealing with a lot of young people today, he wants them to know you can have it all. You just can't have it all today.
You got it.
That there's actually that you got to work through a process, get to the point where you've built up knowledge and that sort of thing. And I think there's some applicability for what we're talking about now.
100%. Yeah.
So
really good.
Fascinating. This will be very interesting. You raised the New York situation to see how this plays. It, in some ways, will be a laboratory to see how this plays that I think is going to have implications on the national basis too. I think in the short term, the Democrats are going to have a real challenge dealing with that and kind of having what I think will be a leader in their party and how that plays, not in New York City, but when you start getting to Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, e.g. the battleground states, how that plays. But even longer term than that, what that success is going to mean for government policies in a whole host of different ways.
Yeah, what's so fascinating actually to me about the Democrat Party and where they're kind of headed right now is you've got a socialist mayoral candidate in New York, and then you've got a very liberal California governor. It's really your two heads of the party currently that are kind of the most popular people right now. Obviously, New York being the biggest city in the East Coast and California being one of the biggest states, they've got a lot of influence associated with both coasts. Yeah. But to your point, it's what happens in Iowa, what happens in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and that Rust Belt area where really America in a lot of ways was built from an industrialization perspective. And I think that, I think they're going to have their hands full with trying to figure out what the messaging is and how they get that messaging out to people that, may say, hey, from the coast, I don't really care. Give me something that's real, tangible, and tactical.
It's interesting on some of these things we're talking about too. Some of the guests that we've had that's spoken about it. I was thinking of Rob Walters too, when he was talking about the importance in a capitalist system that you have the guardrails, e.g. antitrust and those sorts of things. So this administration and how it deals with antitrust, especially relative to a lot of the technology companies, AI, et cetera, I think that's going to be a fascinating conversation.
100%.
So Great conversation. We'll come back at it. One thing for our listeners and our viewers, we've gone through a whole lot of different kind of points in that. You've heard a little bit of our view of it. We would love to hear your viewpoints too. Your thoughts on what we said or things that we should have said that we didn't.